Jai Hind, Namaste and hello and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav and in this video we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 28th of September. Now in this video we'll be discussing the following topics. Is the moon rusting? So basically images from Chandrayaan-1 have suggested heavy presence of ore of iron called hematite, which basically leads to rusting of iron on earth. So we'll see what this news is all about. Then 3 bills in Lok Sabha to bring in changes in labor sector. Now basically government is trying to liberalize labor laws and at the same time provide labor with some form of social security. So these 3 bills are in the line of those labor reforms which ultimately would lead to ease of doing business in India. MSMEs not to be hit by new IBC bill. So basically IBC deals with insolvency proceedings. Now there was an ordinance that after 25th of March, when the lockdown was announced, no new insolvency proceeding could be initiated against a company for the 6 months from 25th of March. So that is being converted into a bill, but that does not give a leeway to fraudsters. Fraudsters would still be tried under the IBC bills and the relevant laws. The Epidemic Diseases Amendment Bill 2020. Now this is very important. So basically in the initial days of the corona pandemic during March, April, we saw horrific scenes when the corona warriors were being attacked by different people when they were going to localities for conducting tests. So they came up with an ordinance in April that whosoever attacks corona warriors would be liable to punishment up to 7 years in jail. So now they are making it a proper bill, so that in future any such situation arises, then people who violate these conditions or who attack the health workers and other professionals, they could be tried. Then Tata Group to unveil India's new first CRISPR test. So in this I will tell you about Tata Group's new COVID test kit, which is based on CRISPR test. Now I will tell you what is CRISPR test. It is related to gene editing, and I will also tell you about Cas9 protein. So very important, we'll see this. Then life markers on Venus. We have already discussed Venus so many times. So again, we'll be discussing about phosphine, what it means for Venus. Then I will tell you about 2 peculiar features of Venus. Number 1, that though Venus is the second planet from the sun, it is hotter than Mercury. Why is that so? I will tell you when we discuss this. And second, relates to the motion of Venus, which is different than all the other planets in our solar system. That also I will tell you when we discuss this in detail. Then rules of engagement on LAC. We have discussed LAC so many times. In this, the only important part is what are the actual rules of engagement when a standoff occurs. So we'll see that. Then economy snapshot. In this, we'll be discussing some headlines like our external borrowing is increasing. So I will tell you something about external borrowing. Then our indirect tax receipts are coming down and direct tax receipts are coming down. So I will tell you about what is direct tax and what is indirect tax. Just brief introduction, nothing deep. Then Lok Sabha passes bill to amend Companies Act to promote ease of doing business. So again, we are working heavily to promote ease of doing business. If you remember, there is also this Shanghai Convention that we signed, and we discussed that in, I think, 3 or 4 videos back, Shanghai Convention, which is also about ease of doing business, because under that, companies who are registered in other countries can go for mediation across jurisdictions. So India is again taking heavy steps for promoting ease of doing business. And we've also discussed in previous videos that World Bank has stopped publishing ease of doing business because of discrepancy in data that is submitted to the bank by different countries. Then the rise, retreat and resurgence of jihadists. This is important. In this, we will see the whole rise of Taliban in Afghanistan. I will tell you why Taliban is called Taliban, what is the Indian connection of Taliban, then what is the Pakistan gameplay regarding Taliban. Then we are dealing with the second generation Taliban. So what is the difference between first generation Taliban and second generation Taliban? Then we'll also see that why they are now going for talks. And we'll also see that despite the talks, nothing much is changing on the ground level. So very important and interesting topic to understand the rise of jihadists. So let's get started. Is the moon rusting? So recently, Union Minister Dharmendra Pradhan, he said that images sent by Chandrayaan-1 suggest that the poles of the moon might be rusting. Now what that really means, this article tells us. Basically at the higher latitudes of moon, they are finding hematite, which is an ore of iron or an oxidized form of iron, and that gives it red color. Even red soils in India, they are red because of presence of hematite only. Okay. Now this red color is a characteristic of the process of oxidation. That means when iron is exposed to oxygen and moisture, then what happens? It starts rusting. Now rust is nothing but an layer of hematite or Fe2O3. Okay. So now why is it happening on moon? First of all, moon, many theories say, was a part of earth only. So it also has minerals like iron. So that is there. Now they are saying that the oxygen from the upper atmosphere of earth along with moisture or water on the lunar surface plus the space dust, which is providing energy, the mixture of these three or the interaction of these three is leading to rusting of iron present on the moon and formation of hematite or iron oxide. So let us see what this article is saying. A recently published study paper in Science Advances found that oxidized iron mineral called hematite Fe2O3 at high latitudes on the moon. Now how is it formed? Through oxidation of the iron on the moon's surface by oxygen from Earth's upper atmosphere. Along with oxygen, water on the lunar surface and heat from interplanetary dust also helped in the oxidation process. Now what is India's contribution to this? That the images were sent by Chandrayaan-1. The team that analyzed the data or conducted the study acquired the data by the Moon Mineralogy Mapper on board the Chandrayaan-1. So important is Moon Mineralogy Mapper on board Chandrayaan-1. Now what is the significance of this? Now they are saying through study of these oxidized iron layers, we can get to know about the evolution of oxygen in Earth's atmosphere. The hematite formed at lunar craters of different ages may help understand the oxygen of Earth's atmosphere in the past 2.4 billion years and reveal facts about evolution of Earth's atmosphere in the past billions of years. So study of hematite from moon might help understanding the evolution of atmosphere on Earth. Now moon is also very rich in many minerals, and that is why countries around the world are now in a space race to go and mine the moon. We have also covered this topic, Artemis Accords, in a video, I think 4 or 5 videos back, and there's also an exclusive video that I've made on the Artemis Accords, which are presented by NASA, and they're trying to basically legalize mining on the moon, and they would be cutting territories on the moon. Right now nobody owns the moon, but their plan is to make moon private property. Plus there was another news that we covered that NASA, to promote moon mining, is going to guarantee the companies who undertake these ventures that NASA would be buying everything from them, and whatever NASA buys would be exclusive property of NASA. Right now whatever falls from space to Earth is part of global property, and it basically belongs to the country where it falls, and they may share with other people. But now when people go to moon and they mine something, then those resources, dust, anything would exclusively belong to NASA under the Artemis Accords. So this is about the rusting on the moon. Now UPSC asks such questions in your prelims as well as in the mains. So please pay attention to such little things. So important thing is Chandrayaan-1 and Moon Mineralogy Mapper and iron oxide or Fe2O3 hematite, and this Fe2O3 is also responsible for red soil that we find on planet Earth, right? Now since the session of parliament is going on, so many new laws are being brought in. So in that series, 3 bills in Lok Sabha to bring in changes in labor sector. Now let us see what these bills are. There's nothing much to discuss. They are very technical things. So let's just see what they are saying. These 3 bills aim to amalgamate laws on social security, occupational safety and industrial relation. The 3 bills are part of government's labor law reforms agenda. Why government is taking labor law reforms? Because government wants to increase the ease of doing business. And if you remember 2 or 3 videos back, we also discussed how World Bank has now stopped publishing ease of doing business report. Why? Because of the discrepancy in the data that different countries send to the World Bank. So this is also important, but India wants to increase its ease of doing business. Why? Higher the ease of doing business in India, more FDI will come in India. More FDI means more capital formation, more employment. More employment means more earnings, means more GDP growth. So that would be overall a good thing for the economy. So in that series, government is trying to bring in labor laws. Now, what happens when they bring labor laws? Some of the laws are relaxed. Now, there are two sides of this relaxation in labor laws. One is that labor interests are somewhat diluted. Other is that at least employment opportunity would increase. Let me explain how. For example, if labor laws are too tough in India, for example, you cannot fire any labor. You have to give them 5 years of gratuity or 5 years of medical or 10 lakh per annum in medical. Now, these things are good for our labor. I'm not criticizing them. But if I am an investor in United States of America and I want to set up a factory, I would not be investing in India because I know that apart from paying the capital cost, the labor cost would be too high. It would be better for me to set up my factory in America only. So that is why we need to make labor laws somewhat flexible to attract these companies. That is how China also attracted so many companies. China may be in name a communist country, but it is a highly capitalistic economy and labor laws are not at all strong there. They are very relaxed labor laws and that is why it has become the factory of the world. So India also needs to invest FDI. That is why we are doing labor law reforms. Now, what are the three? The first one is Industrial Relations Code 2020. It mandates companies with 300 or more workers to prepare and submit to the government standing orders regarding the conditions of service, including shift timings and termination of employment. So what? They'll have to make these compliance reports that what are the service conditions of labor and what are the shift timings and on what conditions and how many labor are being terminated. Now again, why is this important? Now earlier it used to be up to 100 employees. Now many factory owners in MSME sector, what would they do? They would necessarily keep their labor strength below 100 so that they don't have to comply to these norms. But that would actually take a toll because then there would be a problem in expansion of business and people were not ready to take this activity because of the high compliance in labor laws. So that is why this is being relaxed. As of now, this applies to establishment with over 100 employees. Under the Industrial Employment Standing Orders Act 1946, which is among the 3 acts the bill proposes to subsume. So this act is going to be subsumed under the new bill and now companies with 300 and above employees have to file the compliance form. Now second is the Code on Social Security 2020. Now this proposes to bring unorganized sector, gig workers and platform workers under the ambit of social security schemes. Now we know by different estimates that 85% or 90 to 95% of labor by different estimates, they are actually working in the unorganized sector. Now what is unorganized sector? It is a sector which is not following government laws. For example, a grocery shop in your neighborhood. Now under this sector, the workers, they don't have security of tenure. They don't have security of job. They really don't have facilities like pension, gratuity or medical. So what this Code on Social Security aims to do is to bring those workers under these social security programs, including life and disability insurance, health and maternity benefits, provident fund and skill upgradation. The Social Security Code proposes a National Social Security Board. So what is it proposing? A National Social Security Board which shall recommend to the central government formulating schemes for different sections of unorganized workers, gig workers and platform workers. Basically, gig workers and platform workers are like the daily wage workers who basically find employment on as per need basis. Also, aggregators employing gig workers will have to contribute 1 to 2% of their annual turnover for social security, with the total contribution not exceeding 5% of the total amount payable by the aggregator to the gig and platform workers. So now there are many companies who are basically manpower companies only, or human resource companies who basically hire workers and then they send these hired workers on contracts to work in different organizations. Now those workers could be white collar, they could be blue collar, or they could be also these daily wage workers, depending on the form of organization that is. So those workers don't have any access to social security. So such aggregator employers would also need to pay them, especially the gig workers who do jobs on as per need basis. And the third is Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code. Now this was necessary in the light of the massive migrations, the unfortunate scenes that we had to see because of the lockdown. So let us see. It proposes to subsume the Interstate Migrant Worker (MEN) Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979, and now it clearly defines interstate migrant workers. Now this is very important, as those coming on their own from one state and obtaining employment in another and earning up to 18,000 rupees per month. So those earning 18,000 and less and they are going to some other state for working, they would be defined as interstate migrants. Now this makes a distinction from the past definition of only contractual employment. So earlier there was only contract employments that were covered under this. Now the migrant workers would also get Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code. The Epidemic Diseases Amendment Bill 2020. Now what happened during the initial days of the corona pandemic in India? We saw very shameful scenes where the corona warriors were being attacked for going and testing different people. Now that prompted the union government to come up with an ordinance under the Epidemic Act. Now that ordinance punished the perpetrators of such violence against the corona warriors. So now that ordinance is being converted into a bill. So let us see. The bill replaces an ordinance passed in April. The Parent Act was envisaged in 1897 by the British. It was in the Bombay Presidency that they first implemented it. Provides for up to 7 years in jail for those attacking doctors and healthcare workers fighting the COVID-19 outbreak or during any situation similar to it. So this is a very good thing. It fixes a 30-day limit for police investigations and a 1-year limit for the courts to complete the proceedings, failing which the judge will have to give an explanation. So very, very good thing. There also needs to be a new legislation which basically punishes people who attack doctors, and we come across such news frequently. Now this is also a very ethical question because some doctors are not very ethical and they face the ire of the patients, but because of that you cannot demonize the whole community. Tata Group to unveil India's first CRISPR test. Now this is a CRISPR test for COVID-19. So in this it is important to know what is CRISPR and what is Cas9. Now basically CRISPR is a technology for gene editing and Cas9 is a protein which acts like a scissor. So what really happens, like a scissor, you can cut portions of DNA and you can insert or remove genetic material. This is the principle behind CRISPR. Now Tata Group has come up with a testing kit which is based on the CRISPR technology. So let us see. Tata CRISPR test developed by this group received regulatory approvals from DGCI. Again important, for testing kits also you need approval from DGCI. For conducting any test you also need approval from DCGI. So it is very important that for getting any approval for any testing kit, you again need to go to DCGI. And we've discussed the concept of vaccines and the vaccine trial. You need the permission of DCGI and CDCSO. And I also told you that DCGI is an official of CDCSO. DCGI is the last word on vaccine trials and the parent body is CDCSO. We covered it, so you can go back and refer to those videos. The test has met high benchmarks with 96% sensitivity and 98% specificity for detecting the novel coronavirus. It uses indigenously developed CRISPR technology for detection of genomic sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Now this Tata's test is world's first diagnostic test to deploy a specially adapted Cas9 protein to successfully detect the virus causing COVID-19. It achieves the accuracy level of traditional RT-PCR with quicker turnaround time, less expensive equipment, and better ease of use. So what are the advantages? Accuracy as that of traditional RT-PCR, but quick result, less expensive, and ease of use. Now what is CRISPR? As I told you, it is a method of gene editing. It is simple yet powerful tool for editing genomes. It allows researchers to easily alter DNA sequences and modify gene function. Now what could be the potential applications? Correcting genetic defects, treating and preventing the spread of diseases, and improving crops. So there are wide scale implications of such technology, but there are also ethical questions. Some people say that it is like playing God, it is unethical. Then there are ethics related to human testing, whether it should be or whether it should be not. It is very close to stem cell technology. Even in the stem cell technology, there are many ethical questions involved, and so is the case with CRISPR. So that is why we don't see them being used in humans on a large scale, or probably if they are being used, we don't know as of yet. Now what is Cas9? Like I told you, it acts like a scissor. It is a specific protein. The protein Cas9 or CRISPR associated is an enzyme that acts like a pair of molecular scissors capable of cutting strands of DNA. So basically what happens? So for example, this is a DNA strand. So you can cut it and you can either patch it or you can insert some new genetic material. So this is the basic principle of CRISPR and Cas9. You don't need to know much more. It is sufficient for you to have a generic understanding of what this really means. Now, cabinet note ready for vehicle scrappage technology. Now, this is a very good initiative because scrapping of vehicles is necessary. Why? See, these old vehicles that we have, though they may have sentimental values for us or there might be economic considerations, but running such cars is not good for the environment because they guzzle fuel and they are highly polluting as well. And one more thing is that once you sell off or dispose of your old car, only then you would be buying a new one. And when you buy a new one, it gives a fillip to the economy. Now, a proper scrappage would also help the economy because it will create a separate sector in the economy, and it will also help the auto sector itself. How? Because all the raw materials for the auto sector, for example, steel, plastic, and other materials would be available from the scrappage, and that could be recycled to make new cars. And the ministry is saying that it could bring down the cost of car production by 20 to 30%. So big savings there, and it could also make India a hub in future for car manufacturing. So let us see what this is saying. It is a move to aid environment-friendly phasing out of old vehicles. Ministry of Road Transport and Highways has formulated a note for cabinet on creation of an ecosystem of voluntary and environment-friendly phasing out of unfit and old polluting vehicles. Now here they are talking about voluntary phasing out. Now what would happen? For example, you go and you scrap your vehicle. So when you scrap your vehicle, you would actually get some credits which you can redeem at a dealership while buying a new car. The proposed policy, once approved, will be applicable on all vehicles. Now what are the advantages? India could emerge as a hub for automobile manufacturing as key raw materials available from scrapping like steel, aluminum, and plastic were bound to be recycled, bringing down the automobile prices by 20 to 30%. And as a matter of fact, in July 2019, the government had proposed amendments to motor vehicle rules to allow scrapping of vehicles older than 15 years to spur adoption of electric vehicles. So again, very good initiative by the government. MSME is not to be hit by new IBC bill, Minister. Now first off, what is IBC? It is Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. It was first introduced in 2016. Now it basically deals with the insolvency proceedings for a company. Now there are many companies who are into business and they take loans to conduct their business. Now unfortunately, some of the companies are not able to do business in a profitable manner and they go bankrupt. Now when they go bankrupt, they are unable to pay back their loans. This brings the problems of litigation for the company, and it also increases the NPAs for the bank. So as a solution for both the company holders and the bank, the government came with this provision. So the principle is that if the business is making loss regularly, then the company owners or the shareholders, they would file for bankruptcy. Now at this point, the banks or the lenders, they would step in and they would initiate the insolvency proceedings. Insolvency means that selling off the assets of the companies and salvage the loan. Whatever it is owned to them, they would salvage by selling off the assets of the company. So in that matter, what would happen? That the owner or the shareholders of the company, under whose name basically the company is registered, they would not be subjected to any criminal charges. But this bill has inbuilt provisions that detects frauds, and it is not for fraudsters like Mehul Choksi and other people. It is for genuine people who do business and because of stroke of bad luck, their business goes wrong. So not to punish them, but also to favor the lenders, this bill is, or this code is there. Now the government is bringing some amendments to it. Why? Because 25th March onwards, there was a lockdown. And because of that lockdown, many businesses suffered. Now there were many businesses who had to pay back loans and they could not, because basically they did not have any business running. So how could they pay back? So to save them from these insolvency proceedings and help the economy, the government came up with the Ordinance of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which said that after 25th March, whosoever has not been able to pay, no insolvency proceedings would be initiated. Right? But before 25th March, if there was such a company, against that company, there would be insolvency proceedings. And again, this is not a relief measure for fraudsters. So let us see what this is all about. The Rajya Sabha passed the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Second Amendment Bill 2020 to ensure that fresh insolvency proceedings will not be initiated for at least 6 months starting March 25th amid the COVID-19 pandemic. IBC cannot be initiated for companies below rupees 1 crore. So the finance minister made it clear that for companies below 1 crore, IBC cannot be initiated as it is. So there is no threat to MSMEs. And just in a moment, I will also tell you what are MSMEs. I will give you a very simple diagram. You can take screenshot and your worry about MSME is over. So micro, small and medium enterprises are not going to be affected. The provisions of the IBC will be confined only to those default payments that may arise due to COVID-19 period and will not affect the application filed before March 24 when the lockdown was imposed. So no relief for fraudsters. The ordinance and the bill does not provide any protection to frauds. Section 166 of Companies Act 2013, important, remains intact. Thus, there is no protection from fraud. So basically, fraud is detected and dealt with under Section 166 of the Companies Act 2013 under the IBC. Now you can take a screenshot. This is basically from our Instagram page only. So recently the government also changed the definition of MSMEs. So first of all, what are MSMEs? They are micro, small and medium enterprises engaged in production of goods and services. So both goods and services come under the purview of MSMEs. Now why MSMEs are important? They're important because majority of employment in India is in MSME sector, and basically the unorganized sector lies within the MSME sector. New definition. It is based on investment and turnover. So what is it based on? Investment and turnover. There is also a distinction between manufacturing and services also eliminated. So earlier there was a distinction between manufacturing and services and the definition was quite complex. Now they have simplified it. They have made it a unitary definition. No distinction between manufacturing and services. So important points are, it is based on investment and turnover, and there is no distinction between manufacturing and services. See, these are very small things. You might not pay attention to them, but once you get such a question in front of you, then you lose your mind, because then you are confused whether it's A, B, ABC, ABCD, because your basics are not clear. So please pay attention to this. This is the basic part. Now what is micro? Investment up to rupees 1 crore and turnover up to rupees 5 crore. So this is the smallest part or the smallest component of MSME, and this is also not under IBC. Small, investment up to rupees 10 crore and turnover up to 50 crore, and medium, turnover up to 100 crore and investment up to 200 crore. So a very simple definition. I would suggest you to take a screenshot and then your tension for MSMEs is over. Now, economy quick shots. Basically, these are just the headlines. We don't need to get into the news. External debt increases almost 3% to $559 billion at March end. So our external debt is increasing. Why? Because our economy is not doing that well. So more borrowing. Now, another related news is fuel demand to shrink in 2020 by wider 11.5%, Fitch Solutions. Now, there is a connection between the two. Now, our external debt major part used to also be for the fuel consumption, because that payment has to be made in dollars. So we used to basically borrow in dollars and pay back in dollars. Now we have a scheme in which we can borrow in dollars and pay back in rupees, all that. But since the fuel demand is going to shrink, so this is an indicator that economic activity is going down, right? And now external debt is increasing. That means that this external debt component is for consumption purposes, and our exports are going low and imports are increasing, and to pay that we are taking debts, and also to probably service other debts or any other consumption based expenditure. So this is a sign. This is not that big of a percentage. Now, one more thing about external debt, that it has two components. One is short term and the other is long term. So for India, it is a good thing that our majority of external debt is long-term external debt. Now, long-term external debt means that majority of those companies or organizations or countries are invested in India for a long term. So that is not considered to be a bad thing. It is the short-term external debt which is a problem. So right now, we really can't comment, but just 3% is not that much. But I just wanted to clarify the concept of external debt. And fuel demand shrinking means that the demand in economy is down and also the manufacturing activity is down, because fuel is used for manufacturing, also for transport and also for demand. So these things are down. That is why Fitch is saying that fuel demand would be shrinking. One of the extrapolations could also be that green technologies are being explored in India or being adapted, but that doesn't seem to be the case right now. So an 11.5% decrease is definitely a sign of decrease in demand and decrease in economic activity. Again, a news, net direct tax collection dips 31% in April-August period. Now, again, this direct tax means that income tax and corporate tax that people pay are getting down. That means their incomes are going down, or cases of tax evasion are also increasing. Now, that is something that has to be seen by the authorities. But again, this is not a good sign for the economy, because these taxes form a major part of the revenue of the government, and net indirect tax also fall. Now, one more thing, a quick understanding of direct and indirect taxes. What are direct taxes? They are the taxes on your income or your property. So basically the incidence lies on you and you cannot shift it to someone else, right? And it is on property or income. Now, indirect tax is something that is on a transaction. For example, you buy toothpaste. So you are paying an indirect tax in the term of GST or whatever tax that is. Now, one more thing, the direct tax is progressive, because the higher you earn, the higher you pay. But the indirect tax is regressive, because it does not discriminate between the rich and the poor. For example, you are buying a soap and a poor person is also buying the same soap. The same amount of tax you both have to pay. So that does not discriminate. So for a good tax regime, direct tax collection should be higher than indirect tax collection. And in India we have that, but both of them are falling down. Again, not a good sign for the economy. Rules of engagement on LAC. Now this LAC issue we discuss in almost every video. So we won't get into depth of it because we've discussed almost everything about it. We'll just quickly have a look at it. Now, I've told you in earlier videos as well that the entire LAC is divided into three parts. Number one, LAC is a temporary or a working solution for India. We signed the agreement in 1993 when our then Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao visited Beijing, right? And LAC is based on the boundaries existing on that date only. In 1993, as the border existed, that we consider LAC, not the boundary of 1962 or 1959 or any other date, but of 1993. So first of all, this LAC is divided into three sections: Western, Central and Eastern. The Western one is where it is hot right now, the problems are occurring. Central one is the least controversial one, and Eastern one also sees problems every now and then, and we could expect problems in this side in the coming days. Now, there's a problem of perception of what LAC actually is. India considers that LAC is around 30 to 90, but China says it is only around 2000 kilometers. So there's a difference of 1300 to 1500 kilometer in terms of perception as to what is the LAC. Now, when there is no clear-cut line of what is LAC, both the sides patrol these areas, and when they come face to face, that leads to face-offs and that leads to trouble. Now, there have been some ground rules to dealing with these face-offs or these disputes, but we know that we cannot trust China, and that is leading to escalation. One more thing, why more face-offs are occurring now? Because India has heavily ramped up its infrastructure along the LAC. That has rattled China because it has lost its dominance. And the whole story actually started from the 2017 Doklam Tri-Junction Bhutan, India, the conflict that happened. Basically, China was used to having its way and to dominate and bully India. From 2017, India started giving it back to China, and that is something that China cannot really take. And again, China is going to get badly defeated, or it is going to get a very bad embarrassment in the current standoff, because come winters, as they say, winters are coming. Come winters, Chinese army won't be able to sustain themselves there, whereas our brave troops are the best in the world when it comes to high altitude combat. I say that in every video, and that is a fact. And the Chinese soldiers are paper tigers because they are the legacy of one child policy. They are spoiled brats. They cannot sustain themselves in such situations. And time and again, they have proved that they are no warriors. For example, the last war that they fought was on Vietnam, and there they were heavily routed by the Vietnamese army. This is on record that they couldn't even basically locate points on the map or find their targets or shoot at the right targets. This is all in public domain. And recently at a UN peacekeeping mission operation in Congo, they abandoned their post when they were ambushed, and later they were rescued by Indian army only. Now let us see what the article is saying. Why are there different perceptions? I've told you, because there's no clear-cut demarcation on the ground. There's no commonly delineated LAC, with both India and China having different perceptions about the LAC. This has led to periodic tensions, and number of transgressions and face-offs went up as India's border infrastructure improved and Indian army patrols to the claim areas increased over the years. A series of boundary agreements have been signed and confidence building measures. We have discussed each and everything in previous videos. Please go and watch those videos. Carried out to maintain peace and tranquility while the two sides attempted to delineate the boundary through special representatives, but that mechanism has also failed. How should troops deal with face-offs? In 2012, India and China agreed to establish a working mechanism for consultation and coordination to study ways and means to conduct and strengthen exchanges and cooperation between military personnel and establishments in the border area. So this is all mumbo jumbo. The main thing is that in 2013, we sign a BDCA or Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, and it lists several mechanisms to reduce misunderstandings and improve communication, but nothing seems to be working with Chinese people. Article 6 of the agreement prohibits either side from tailing the patrols of the other in the areas where there is no common understanding of LAC. We have also discussed this earlier. Now, what do the border agreements say? A key element of both 1993 and 1996 agreements is that the two sides would keep their forces in the areas along the LAC to a minimum, but the problem is that it does not specify what minimum means. So that is open to their own interpretations, and that leads to problems. However, the agreements do not define what comprises the minimum level. The 1996 agreement limits the deployment of major categories of armaments close to the LAC, including tanks, infantry combat vehicles, guns with 75 mm or bigger caliber, mortars with 120 mm or above, and various missiles. But since China is not honoring any of these, so we have also started making our deployments. In fact, China is said to be deploying missiles along the Mansarovar Lake and we have sent our T-90 brigade to T-90 can also fire missiles, and we have sent it to DSDBO. So we are going to give it back to China and we are going to give them a very befitting reply. It also limits combat aircraft from flying within 10 km of LAC, but Chinese are they're basically doing sorties on their helicopters and their fighters. We have also started doing that. It stipulates that neither side shall open fire, cause biodegradation, use hazardous chemicals, conduct blast operations, or hunt with guns or explosive within 2 km from the LAC. So all of that has gone to junk now. Use of firearms on the LAC is strictly regulated as per the agreements of 1993, 1996 and 2005. The 1993 and 1996 agreements also mandate that pending a final solution to the boundary question, the two sides shall strictly respect the LAC. But the Chinese would never go for a final solution on paper. They would keep doing this. They would keep trying to change status quo unilaterally and force it on us. But we have had enough. Further, in these agreements, India and China committed themselves to clarification and confirmation of the LAC to reach a common understanding of the alignment. Now, China is fighting with everyone, so they won't be coming to a talking point. And because they have lost their nose in Ladakh, now they are basically hungry for a fight because they want something to take back home. They don't want to face that embarrassment in front of their domestic audience, because for the communist regime, it is all about the appearances. However, this process has made little progress since 2003. Both sides have so far exchanged maps only in the central sector. I've shown you, which is the least disturbed one. You can see that, leading to overlapping claims at several points due to differences in perception. But in the central sector, now China is using its proxy called Nepal. I told you yesterday as well that Nepal is even claiming Nainital to be a part of Nepal. So I don't know what is wrong with China. Now Lok Sabha passes bill to amend Companies Act, promote ease of doing business. So first we saw 3 labor reform bills, again for ease of doing business, and I've explained why we need ease of doing business. And again, the Companies Act is being amended to promote ease of doing business. See, this is also very, very important in the line of, in the view of the corona pandemic and the global shift. Now people are trying to abandon China and they need to shift their facilities. Now it is a good time for India to implement these reforms so that India becomes an attractive destination for these companies to shift their production bases to India. For example, Japan is paying its own companies to relocate from China. So if we have good conditions, so those companies would be coming to India. Similarly, United States could be bringing their production lines to India. For example, now India has started making premium phones like iPhone 11. So in future, we could expect that the entire Apple line could be shifting to India. So we need to bring in these reforms. Companies Act Amendment Bill 2020, which decriminalizes a number of technical and filing related corporate offenses. See, again, this is scary because due to lack of filing or some kind of discrepancy in filing, you could be subjected to litigation. So that also places a problem on the business people. And if you remember, we also discussed the UN Singapore Convention, which is also about dealing with business disputes through mediation, right? So India is also a signatory to this, one of the 53 countries including USA and China. So again, this is in the series of steps that India is taking to ensure its ease of doing business so that more and more companies come and invest in India. So Companies Act decriminalizes a lot of things which come under technical and filing related corporate offenses, which is a very good step. It also allows direct listing of Indian companies on foreign stock exchanges and revokes the criminal provisions added to the Companies Act for violation of provisions of corporate social responsibility rules. So again, a good step that you can directly go and list your company on the foreign stock exchange and you would also not be liable for criminal proceedings if you violate the CSR rules. Around 48 sections of the Companies Act 2013 will be amended to decriminalize various offenses. Now it also looks to promote ease of doing business. Like that is the whole point. Decriminalization of various provisions under the company's law will also help small companies by reducing litigation burden on them. And that is one of the reasons why small companies, they don't want to become big or they don't register themselves. For example, with companies of 10 employees and more, you have to register and then file returns and all that. So what people do, they basically keep their size less than 10 so that they don't fall under the compliance regime. See, people don't have a problem with compliance, but the compliance processes are so complicated, and then there are so many contact points that opens a lot of space for corruption and harassment, and that is why people don't go big. But this seeks to change that. For prompting ease of doing business, 17 provisions will be amended. But mind you, no relaxation for serious offences, including fraud and those that cause injury to public interest or deceit. The minister said, number of compoundable offences under the act remains same at 35. Now a compoundable offence is that in which you pay a fine and then you can go. There will be also a new chapter on producer organization which will help in the concept of FPO or the Farmers Producers Organization. Now life markers on Venus, we have discussed that 2 times already. So what has happened? That scientists have found phosphine gas in large quantities, 20 parts per million, which is huge given the atmosphere of Venus. Now phosphine is a biomarker. What a biomarker means is that it is essentially related to biological processes. On Earth, phosphine is produced by the decay of organic matter, right? So there must be some organic matter. So what really happens in the decay process, that microbes, they decay the organic matter, and these microbes, they release phosphine. So that means that there might be some microbes, some form of microbes on Venus which produce this phosphine. But nobody is saying for sure right now that there is life on Venus. We need to have a contact survey, only then we can make the definite statement. And also, phosphine is not the only biomarker that has been found on Venus. In 2011, they also found ozone in the atmosphere of Venus. Ozone again is a biomarker. So this find is being called more significant than the finding of water on Mars and Moon. So now let us see what the article is saying. We'll quickly go through this. Okay. Now the background, an international team of astronomers has announced the discovery of traces of a molecule known as phosphine on Venus. This has caused great excitement because given the chemical and geological composition of Venus, this can imply the existence of life forms that release this substance through biochemical pathways. But one more thing, Venus is a very hostile planet. We saw that surface temperatures exceed 470 degrees Celsius and there is sulfuric acid in its atmosphere. So we need to really explore what there is, because these conditions are not really ideal for life as we know it. Remember, I told you the other day as well that we use the phrase as we know it, because there might be other forms of life which we are not aware of. So probably we'll get to know. Phosphine could originate from unknown photochemistry or geochemistry, or by analogy with biological production of phosphine on Earth from the presence of life. First observed phosphine on Venus using the James Clerk Maxwell telescope. Now remember this name, James Clerk Maxwell telescope, in the Mauna Kea Observatory in Hawaii. So first observation was in 2017, but they took their time to actually confirm it because this was such a monumental news. Pursuing the search further with the 45 telescope array ALMA Atacama Large Millimeter Submillimeter Array in Chile led to confirmation of their observations by this extremely sensitive instrument in 2019. So have the astronomers found definite signs of life? The detected presence of phosphine on Venus does convey the possibility of life there. After detecting the phosphine and estimating the amount in Venus's atmosphere, about 20 parts per billion, researchers have calculated whether this amount of phosphine can be produced by natural chemical processes such as sunlight, volcanoes erupting, and lightning. But they say that the other mechanisms could at most produce only 10,000th of the amount that the phosphine they have detected. That means if these would have been the reasons, then the amount detected would have been very, very small as compared to what is being found there. So that means something else is there. However, they do not rule out the possibility that there could be unknown natural processes. Of course, there could be unknown natural processes. We know very little of actually what all is there in the world. Photochemistry or geochemistry that can produce this amount of the biomarker. Therefore, more work is needed to prove that it is indeed because of bacteria or some sort of life than there is so much to be discovered. Now, why phosphine gas is considered a biomarker of life? I've told you because of the degeneration of organic material. The molecule of phosphine gas consists of phosphorus atoms surrounded by 3 hydrogen atoms, just like ammonia. So this is ammonia and this is phosphine, right? Consists of a nitrogen atom surrounded by 3 hydrogen atoms. Now this is the molecular structure of phosphine. This is phosphorus, hydrogen, hydrogen and hydrogen. And for ammonia, nitrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen and hydrogen. On Earth, this molecule is produced by industrial processes, but that amount is small. It is also produced by some anaerobic bacteria, that means which function in the absence of oxygen or in very low oxygen conditions, which live in oxygen sparse environments such as sewers, landfills or even animal gut. So even in your gut, there is bacteria that produces phosphine. If you can rule out the production of the gas through chemistry, it is the biochemical processes that form a source of the gas, the anaerobic bacteria, that is the bacteria that occurs in oxygen sparse environment. Hence, it is considered a biomarker in astronomy. Has phosphine been found on other planets? Yes, on Jupiter and Saturn. As early as the 1970s, when the first exoplanets were not even discovered, experimentally, phosphine was seen on Jupiter. But there it is said to form deep in the interiors of the gas giant and rise to the top in a purely chemical process. We know that Jupiter is a gas giant, but Venus is like Earth. It has a terrestrial surface and it does not have that much amount of phosphine in it. So then again, there could be some form of life. Now the next point is that Venus is considered to be a hostile planet. So how can life survive there? Now the surface temperature of Venus at about 470 degrees Celsius is too hot to harbor life as we know it. Again, as we know it. It is hot enough to melt lead. It is hotter than Mercury, which is closest to the sun. Now again, pay attention. This is again a point for your PT. Venus experiences a runaway greenhouse gas effect, which traps all heat that falls on it. So that means, see, if you look at it, this is sun, this is Mercury, this is Venus and this is Earth. So Mercury should have been hotter than Venus, but Venus is hotter because of runaway greenhouse gas effect. That means it is trapping all the heat that is falling on Mercury. There could be a question about Venus in the prelims, that regarding Venus, it is the second planet from the sun. It is hotter than Mercury or it is cooler than Mercury. Now if you don't know this point, then you might mark that Mercury is hotter because it is closer to the sun, but this is the exception. One more exception, that Venus, it basically moves in the opposite direction to all the planets in our solar system. So these are two special facts about Venus. Number one, it is the second rock from the sun, but it is hotter than Mercury. And number two, it moves just opposite to what other planets move in our solar system. But high up in its atmosphere, there are clouds which can provide a cooler home to microbial life. Even there, the atmosphere is teeming with sulfuric acid vapor, which makes it extremely hostile, thereby reducing the chance of finding life forms. So they have clouds on Mercury as well, but the atmosphere is rich in sulfuric acid. So that sulfuric acid is highly corrosive. So it could be corrosive to the microbes as well. But then again, even on Earth, in deep oceans, we have found microbes and different type of life forms at the point where the conditions of life seem almost impossible. So who is to say that life could not exist on Venus? Let us see. The phosphine signature could be the sign of some extraordinary chemistry, as it could be of life form. So either it could be some chemistry or life form. The next logical step is to actually do in situ measurements for Venus's atmosphere by sending space probes there. And I told you India is going to send by 2023. That is our target. Now, have space missions been sent to Venus? Yes, Russians were the first ones who sent it. Then in recent past, European space agencies Venus Express and JAXA, which is Japanese space agencies Atatsuki. Related to this is that Russia is now claiming that Venus belongs to Russia. Why? Because they have done extensive studies on Venus in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and they were the first one to crash land a probe on Venus and also to actually land a probe on Venus. So now Russia is saying that we own Venus. What a world we are living in. Many space missions have flown over by Venus. For example, NASA's Parker Solar Probe used the gravity of Venus to achieve gravity assistant boosts to its velocities on its journey to the sun. NASA is planning a mission to Venus to be launched next year, and it is going to be in collaboration with Russia, but Russia is also going to launch its independent missions. The Indian Venus mission is being developed. Though formally unnamed, it is referred to as Shukrayaan-1. Now again, like I said, related news, Venus is a Russian planet, say the Russians. The head of the Russian Space Corporation, Roscosmos, said that we own Venus. They are going to send a probe to Venus, Venera D, in collaboration with the US, but they would also be sending their independent missions. Now Venus is similar in size to Earth and is our closest planetary neighbor. In fact, I've told you that Venus is called Earth's twin, but it spins backward. Remember I told you, it spins backward compared to other planets. So what are the two distinct points about Venus? That it is hotter than Mercury because of runaway greenhouse gas effect, and it spins backward compared to other planets. Between 1967 to 84, Venusian studies carried out in Russia were at the forefront of international research into that planet. And on March 1, 1966, Venera 3, Soviet space probe, crash landed on Venus, and the first successful landing on Venus by Venera 7 in December 1970. And now they are going to send Venera D in collaboration with the US. So remember this name, Venera. Soviets were the first to be on Venus. They have conducted extensive study. India would also be sending its Shukrayaan. And the peculiar points about Venus, runaway greenhouse gas effect. So it is hotter than Mercury. And number two, it spins backward compared to other planets in our solar system. So this is all about Venus, phosphine, ozone, biomarker, and everything related to it. The rise, retreat, and resurgence of jihadists. So basically it tells about the Taliban in Afghanistan, how it came to be, okay. Then the problem that Taliban brought to the Afghan society. Then what happened post 2001 when there was 9/11 attack and the Americans came and they displaced Afghanistan, and how now the Taliban is the second generation Taliban that we are dealing with. And finally, almost 20 years after Taliban was displaced, it is back to the power structure in Afghanistan. So let us see what this article is saying. So poet Muhammad Iqbal called Afghanistan the heart of Asia. And there are many theories which says that if you rule Afghanistan, you rule the entire Asian and European region. So that is why Afghanistan is strategically very important. See, it connects India to Central Asia. Then there is Russia, there is Pakistan. So Afghanistan is in the center of everyone. So that is why the peace and stability in Afghanistan is very, very important. This article also tells us about the role of Pakistan and how it played dirty tricks in Afghanistan. So let's begin. The roots of the Taliban, they go back to the Mujahideen movement against the Soviet troops in Afghanistan in 1980s. So basically, Soviets were there in the Afghanistan, right? But the US could not directly get involved into the struggle. But there was a Cold War between the two. So US sponsored the Taliban. And interestingly, Osama bin Laden was trained by CIA and he attacked US only in 9/11. So these proxy wars, they always come back to bite you. So similar thing would happen to future in Pakistan as well. This is a guarantee. Many of the Taliban's early leadership, including Mullah Omar, fought the Soviets with various Mujahideen factions, which were supported by the Central Intelligence Agency or the CIA and Pakistan's ISI and Saudi Arabia. After the Soviets pulled back in 1989, the Mujahideen groups started fighting each other, plunging the country into a civil war. Now, what happened? There was a brief period of democracy. Afghanistan was a very progressive country, but when Taliban took reins, everything went berserk. The post-communist Afghanistan was divided along ethnic lines. So basically, Afghanistan is also a tribal society, and there are many ethnicities, and they keep fighting with each other. One more thing, Afghan people are very freedom-loving. So in history, nobody has been able to actually conquer them. Whosoever has gone to Afghanistan has lost. And one of the reasons is the topography of the region and the hardened minds and hearts of the people of Afghanistan that they will fight. But unfortunately, the Taliban has ruined that country, else this country has great potential. There was no central authority, life was chaotic, crimes were rampant. It was against this backdrop, a group of madrasa students, Talibs. So Taliban came from the name Talibs, and they were madrasa students, and Indian connect is that they are Deobandi factions. With roots in Deobandi seminaries and support from different Deobandi factions in Pakistan, came together to launch a new reform movement. But this was actually not a reform, it was back to the Middle Ages, and they plunged the country into darkness. Predominantly Pashtun, their declared goals were establish order, restore peace, disarm the militias, enforce the Sharia code, and unite people under their version of Islam, which is a very dangerous version. The Taliban swept up military victories with the help of ISI. So Pakistan also saw a very ripe opportunity in Afghanistan. Basically, Pakistan sees Afghanistan as its strategic backyard. See, this is Pakistan, this is Pakistan, this is Afghanistan, and this is India. So Pakistan's calculation is that if India ever invades, we will fall back to Afghanistan, regroup there, and then attack India. And it is their mindset which has crippled the entire country called Afghanistan. Pakistan is very, very wary of India having any role to do in post-Taliban order. So it is doing everything that it can to keep India out of negotiations. But Afghanistan is very, very important to India because it can be the gateway to Central Asia for India, and Central Asia is going to be a very important region in the future. It is rich in mineral resources, it has a huge population which can serve as a market as well. So we need access to that region, but Pakistan is blocking it. And if we have friends in Afghanistan, then we can also check the extremist and terror organizations, which are basically Pakistan proxies which operate from Afghanistan. Pakistan found the Taliban the most reassuring proxy in the otherwise fractured Afghanistan. Once in power, the Taliban enforced their version of strict Islamist code, which included banning women working in public offices, keeping girls out of schools, and prescribing public music. Kabul sports stadiums were turned into public execution ground. And in March 2001, the Taliban blew up the two giant stones of Buddha in Bamia, a very disgraceful and shameful act. After the 9/11 terror attacks on the US, Mullah Omar faced a difficult choice. Osama bin Laden, who had engineered and designed and executed the whole plan while sitting in Afghanistan. So Americans said that give us Osama bin Laden, but Mullah Omar refused, and then America invaded Afghanistan. And finally, where was Osama bin found? In Pakistan. So you can connect the dots. The US asked the Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden. Omar refused, which was followed by the US invasion and the ouster of Taliban from power. Since then, the Taliban have been fighting to recapture what they lost, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Now what India says that the Afghan peace process should be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, right? But it is not Afghan-led because it is the US and Taliban that are calling the shot, and it is not even Afghan-owned. In 2015, the Taliban announced that Mullah Omar had died 2 years earlier in Pakistan. Mullah Mansoor, who succeeded Omar, was killed in US airstrike in 2015. So two big leaders dead. Now in 2016, Malwali Habatullah Akhundzada, he has been the group's leader. And under him, Taliban have taken fight and talk approach. So they will fight on one hand and they will also keep talking. Now US wants to pull out of Afghanistan. This was one of the promises that Trump made, and US doesn't and basically US doesn't lose wars, it just lose interests. So US has lost interest in Afghanistan and it wants a honorable exit from Afghanistan. So they are so they are dealing with the Afghan government and the Taliban, and they just want to leave that region. And once they do, we'll get to see what really happens in Afghanistan. In 2018, US officials and Taliban representatives held their first meeting in Doha, where the insurgents had opened a political office. And now the Afghan peace process is also happening there. And India first time addressed a sitting where Taliban was also there. We still do not recognize Taliban, but there was no mention of Taliban from the External Affairs Minister or the Indian side. Throughout talks with the US, Taliban refused to agree to a lasting ceasefire. Pakistan played a key role in the Taliban's resurgence, rattled by India's growing influence in the post-Taliban Afghanistan. As Steve Call writes, he's a writer, in his book Directorate S, that the ISI had set up a secret unit called Directorate S to handle its Taliban operations and work from an army camp in Ojri near Rawalpindi. Very much possible given the depths to which Pakistan can go. See, I will tell you, in Pakistan, the most influential part is army, right? As in India, people aspire to get into politics or they aspire to get into civil services. In Pakistan, it is a big privilege if you become an officer in the army. Now, army calls all the shots in the country. Now, why does the army has such a big legitimacy in the country? They have created a narrative, and that narrative is, number one, that there is a constant threat from India and only the army of Pakistan can save people from this threat. So their actions are not generally challenged. And number two, they have created a narrative again that Pakistan is the most important geopolitical space in the whole world, that everybody wants a piece of Pakistan, so they should protect Pakistan at all costs and they should go to any depth to protect Pakistan. So that is what is happening, and we can see what is happening. Now, Imran Khan, it seems, has run its course for the Pakistani army, and they have allowed Nawaz Sharif to come back, and probably he'll be coming back to Pakistan. So we'll see new things happening in Pakistan real soon. Related to that, the Shia-Sunni problem is getting worse in Pakistan. So we'll get to see some new changes in Pakistan real soon. That is my opinion, but let us see what happens. Now, stalemate. Now the war has entered into a stalemate. The Afghan government cannot defeat the Taliban, and the Taliban seem unable for now to seize the major population centers, including Kabul. So that is why they're talking. They haven't had a change of heart. It is just the ground reality is that nobody can move forward. So they are compromising now. This, coupled with the US's desire to get out of war, prompted the peace talks. Like I said, US does not lose wars. It only loses interest, and it has lost interest in Afghanistan. But hard questions remain. With the US agreeing to pull back, the Taliban have met one of their key goals, that is to push US out of the country. But they haven't recognized the Afghan constitution, neither will they. There is no truce yet. It's not clear what would their eventual goal be. So again, these are the things in gray areas. Now, second generation Taliban. There are some differences between the Taliban of 1990s and today's Taliban. Their links with military and religious establishment in Pakistan are different. Their working relationship with terrorist outfits like Al-Qaeda are limited today, but their core ideology hasn't changed. If they were not ready to share power then, they won't do so now. There are no signs that their approach towards liberal institutions, minorities, women and other groups has changed either. So it would be like back to square one or old wine in a new bottle. Almost 20 years after they lost Kabul, the Taliban are now controlling almost half of the country, and they are going to be calling shots in the future in the country. And ISI is going to have a big say. So there could be tough times ahead for India regarding the Afghan question. So folks, that is all for this video. Thank you for watching. If you like our video, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new video that we post. Also, if you liked the video, please press the like button. And do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. See you next time. Till then, stay happy, stay safe, and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.